Go ahead and get started. Greetings, everybody. My name's Don Weber. You're here to hear me talk about the prioritizing of OT security efforts. This is one of our SANS at Nights talk, SANS at Mike. I'm used to having the at night talks. Typically, SANS does these at our live training events when we're actually going out on site and training people. In the evenings, we'll have some people that are presenting. I do a lot of, whenever I teach, I try to present something at each and every one of them. But certainly we have people coming from outside organizations as well, not just SANS instructors. So you will get SANS instructors, but you'll also have other people that are just coming in to present some of their research to the people that are attending the events. Since we have moved to an online forum associated with this, we wanted to continue doing that education, continue providing people with the opportunities to speak, also to continue providing opportunities for people to come to webinars and get the same type of content. I'm actually teaching a class right now. It's a V Live class, and so I'm teaching Monday mornings and Wednesday mornings for 4 hours. And I live in South Texas, so I'm teaching some students in the UK. It's afternoon for them, it's morning for me, and so I am at a conference right now, but it's a 5-week conference every other day. So, we're here, and so we're going to talk about the 5 tactical things that need to be accomplished while leadership is creating a security program. And I think this is important because I do a lot of assessments in the OT environments, and I'm looking at the people on the ground. I'm gathering information from people that are actually implementing, securing, managing the processes within these environments. And when I'm providing my guidance back, I'm providing information to leadership so that they can modify their approach. And a lot of times they have to think about and prioritize their efforts. But at the same time, the people that I just talked to, the people that are on the ground, they're like, hey, what can I do right now? What are my priorities? What do I need to address? And so I try to organize my thoughts around that, provide some simple guidance so that they can go forward and accomplish things, make a positive difference while their leadership is redefining their approach towards security in these environments. I do need to caveat this a little bit. If you don't understand what an OT environment is, I'm not going to go into complete detail about all of the different components and the different things that you will experience or should be familiar with. So I'm kind of hoping that you have an understanding of what a process is, but think about it from the standpoint of utilities or some type of food and beverage producer, where they're actually developing something and they've got product lines and they're cooking things or mixing things, and then eventually that goes into a vat, which eventually goes into smaller containers and shipped out, goes through distribution. So it's those types of environments, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we're going through, but I hope I'm not going to delve into the basics of an OT environment. Okay. There is, one of the other caveats about this. Well, actually, two things. First of all, for every SANS event, we do have an evaluation link. My understanding is they're going to paste that link into the chat window for this. So if you have a moment, it would really help me out if you would take a few moments to click on the link, fill out the information there. It talks about how the content was delivered to you, both from my style, the input from the class was, from the presentation, was it what you expected? But also it talks about, it allows you to give feedback about this forum, this venue, the go-to training, the go-to webinar forum, whether you could hear me, whether you experience lag and stuff like that. It's all really important to SANS so that we can understand that and improve this process, all right? Another thing is that this is, in my mind, an at-night talk. So, it's, I don't want to say it's a little, it's laid back, but it is laid back. This is not a teaching environment. I'm not here to, I am here to kind of express some of my opinions. If we were alive, if we were sitting down, I would hope that everybody would have, their favorite beverage, tasty beverage. I'm drinking water right now, but hopefully, you're drinking something that satisfies you. A lot of you are in the evening right now, but so sit back, relax. Hopefully we can have a good time. There is a question windows. I've pulled up a question windows. So please type your questions in there. If you have any questions, I will get them. I'll get to them as soon as I can. I might get a little bit distracted. I will let you know if I'm reading questions and trying to answer questions. If I delay, I might come back to your questions, or I just might choose to move on so that we can get through all of the topic, okay? But please go ahead and ask your questions. If I don't get to it during the talk, I'll try to get to it at the end of the talk. And if at the very least, I've provided you my contact information at the end, and you can email me, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about your question and get you an answer. All right, so let's dive into this. Well, first of all, who am I and why am I talking to you about this? My name is Don Weber. I work for Cutaway Security, and we're a small organization that does information security assessments for OT and for operational technology and industrial control system environments. That's what we specialize in, but we do penetration testing, security assessments, security research as well. I teach I am a SANS instructor. I teach the ICS 410 class, which is ICS SCADA Security Essentials, and that's what I'm teaching this week and for the next 4 weeks. I also teach the hosted class, which is Assessing and Exploiting Control Systems, which is a more hands-on. It's not a SANS course, but it's taught at SANS events, and we just give a little bit different of a style, and we outline the penetration and security research methodology to help people understand how to approach doing assessments in these restricted environments, how to pull apart embedded devices and understand radio communications and so forth. So that would be the hosted class. If you want more information about myself or my company, obviously there's links right there. You can check us out on LinkedIn or go directly to our company website. But what we're here to talk about today is those tactical, tactical things that we can use to secure our environments. But to get there, we need to talk about security programs, different approaches that our leadership is going to start using to redefine our security programs, so that you can understand why I'm actually talking about this, why I'm bringing it up, and then we can actually get to the meat of the conversation, those 5 things that we absolutely want to take into consideration while our leadership is redefining our security programs. Okay, why we're here is because this is the worst case scenario. It's the scenario where we have an enterprise network, and we also have our control network, our devices that actually control the physical world, that could that are managing systems that could injure people, that could lead to spilling of products either onto the floor or into the environment, leaking of any type of gas and so forth. Okay, some organizations have those control networks, those control devices connected to the networks, and that network is not segregated from their actual enterprise environment, which is also exposed to the internet. So that would be the worst case scenario. And while I have this picture, this example here of the absolute worst case scenario, in reality, there's any combination of this. I've gone into organizations, well-respected organizations, that have had control networks that they just didn't really designate as a control network. And it's been as soon as you connected to their enterprise environment in any location, you are able to hit some of the control devices like the PLCs, okay, like the management servers that were controlling those processes as well. And they just didn't realize that they hadn't modified their thought process to take into consideration that they had a control network within their environment. For other organizations, I have seen some segregation and some segmentation, but they never actually tested it. In other words, they had implemented firewalls to separate their control networks from their enterprise, but they created a lot of holes so that business can talk into the control network, and so that their engineers can be getting their corporate emails, but also doing their work within the control environment. So while this is the worst case scenario, no firewalls, no separation, you're going to find that some organizations, there's different maturity levels around this, okay? When we're talking about security programs and we're talking about our OT environments, what I've typically found is when we're considering our critical infrastructure, when we're talking about things that are gas and oil, utilities, or some of the other organizations that would be regulated by a government, whether it's in the United States or the EU or Asia, that critical infrastructure, those organizations are required to adhere to, have a security program. They have been given guidance about their approach, some minimum components that should be associated with that. They typically look to that to help define their security programs. So our critical infrastructure usually has these things addressed. In some, some people do it better than others. Some have different approaches and so forth. But when you go into an organization that has critical infrastructure, you can expect to have a security program that is devoted to their control networks. In other words, they have a security program for their enterprise environment, and they have one for the OT environment. But when we're not talking about critical infrastructure, when we're talking about production like food and beverage and other types of production, when we're talking about distribution, a lot of times the security program for the enterprise is the same security program for the OT network, for the control networks. And a lot of times, that means that there is no security program for it, because the control network, the OT network, they can't adhere to the same requirements as your enterprise environment. They can't do the same password policies. They can't do some of the vulnerability management and the maintenance windows and so forth. And so either they sign for a bunch of waivers to get around that, which typically never happens. Usually what happens is they just ignore the policies. They just ignore the security programs. And the security teams, the IT teams do their best to implement that within the control network, but usually it's the process, those control networks, they win out over those policies. And so the people that are doing this turn to the battles that they can win, that they can enforce within their enterprise environments, and our control environments, they lag behind. And we're trying to help people get on top of that. Organizations that understand this and are starting to look at this and realize that they want to make the change, they will need a security program for their control network. They are starting to look into it, and they're starting to ask questions. I do get a lot of questions about, okay, what's the best approach? How should we be organizing our efforts around this? What should our leadership be turning to? How should we organize our documentation? Should we be looking at the, should we be thinking about the ISO 27000, the information security management information? We don't want a certification, but we understand that that's something to achieve. Should we be looking at that? Or should we be telling our leadership that we want to adhere to the NIST 853 with the caveat that leveraging the Guide for Industrial Control System Security that's been put out by the National Institute of Technologies? Okay, and those are great places to start. There's a plethora of information about it. They really drill down, but actually, in my mind, there's a lot of information overload in that. There's a lot of great direction in there, but we're talking about defining a new security program within our control networks. We're talking about coming up with something that is implementable within our control networks, that's different, that's separate from our enterprise. Okay, and if we start with a whole bunch of things and we try to address every little thing, we're not really, it's going to be really difficult to prioritize. It's going to be very difficult to understand what what we actually want to implement and how it's going to differ from our enterprise network. So my recommendation, and actually the recommendation for the SANS ICS team, is we want people to consider and turn towards the NIST Cyber Security Framework, often referred to as CSF. Okay, and this framework helps organizations identify their maturity for different parts of a security program. Okay, it has five I think I keep wanting to call them domains, but they're actually called functions. It's got 5 functions, and we'll review those in just a second. 5 functions that will help organizations review what they're currently doing, assign a maturity level associated with how well they're accomplishing those different things, and then they can use that to prioritize their efforts. And that's what I recommend organizations do. You start with the NIST Cyber Security Framework, get an understanding of the things that you do well right now and the things that your team are challenged by and need assistance from leadership on, and then prioritize those things. Provide personnel for that, additional funding for that, assigning specific processes to address that. Okay. So once you have an understanding of that, and then you can provide the guidance around what you want your approach to be for your control network, then your team, your leadership can start turning to the ISO 27001, the NIST documentation to help drill down and ensure that you didn't miss certain parts of your security program as you're implementing it. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. All right, but we're not here to talk about strategy, okay? But I need to talk a little bit about strategy to kind of set up the picture. How is leadership going to redefine this? I can drill into this. Honestly, we've talked about this on other webcasts, and so you can go back and listen to those webcasts. But what I'll do is I'll direct you to one of the white papers that I was helping with, associated with the SANS ICS program. And that is the white paper on Security by Design, a Systems Roadmap Approach. And this is by Barbara Filkins, and it's up on the SANS reading room. You can go see that. It's also associated with a webcast that Barb and I did associated with this. And what she's done in this paper is she is taking a water utility that didn't have a security program, and they used the NIST Cybersecurity Framework to help organize their thoughts, organize their approach. And she walks through going from from ground zero all the way up to a fully implemented security program. And she helps with prioritization and how to really approach this, how leadership should be strategically looking at these things. And it's a very good paper. I recommend that you look at it if you're interested in that. When they asked me if I wanted to do this, and I came up with this topic about tactical stuff, I knew I was on the right track, because as soon as I decided I wanted to talk about this topic, Dale Peterson from Digital Bond, like the next week, he put out a blog post called "Ordering the NIST Cybersecurity Framework Functions for Efficient Risk Reduction." In other words, and you can read it, what he talks about in there is that he's being approached by a lot of executives. Hey, we need to secure our environments. We need to look at our security programs. We need to identify our maturity, and we need to understand how to approach it. What should we be prioritizing? And that's what Dale talks about in here. He talks about the 5 things. So there's 5 domains, but he has ordered them in the manner that he would recommend to CEOs, depending on the organization, on what they should prioritize. Okay. He talks about protection. They should, absolutely, one of the first things they should do is look to see if they're protected, if they've isolated their OT network, their control network from their corporate network. And if they haven't done that, then that's probably the biggest risk reduction right there, is by doing that segregation and segmentation. After that, he talks about recovering. Recover is different than our business environments. When we're talking about recovering control networks, we are talking about making sure that the process is recovered, and recovered in a safe manner, that we can go from different states, whether it's all the way down to spinning up everything, ensuring that from a cyber perspective, everything's okay, but also from a process perspective, that the process comes up safely and the way we expect. Okay, and that needs to be planned for. Okay, and it's one of the things that people typically leave to the end, but unfortunately, if they're going to have a problem, if they want to reduce risk, they need to accept the fact that there's going to be an issue. And so determining how they're going to recover, what are the steps, who's doing what are the roles and responsibility, and so forth, and testing that is hugely important. Also, he had, asset inventory, identification of different things within the environment, software, hardware, where it's distributed. That's the next thing they should be taking into consideration. And then they should be thinking about how to respond. Okay, their teams need to be organized. If you don't know how to respond, why are you detecting anything? You can detect everything, but if your team doesn't have a process, if you haven't identified roles and responsibilities and so forth, you can't take action. Okay, and that's a huge concern. So before you start really kind of throwing a lot of money and time and effort at detection, you should be having conversations with your teams about how they're going to be doing response. Okay, and then finally, the last thing, the last one, prioritization. After you have all of this information, is you need to have information from your environment. What are the activities that are going on, so that you need to do that detection. So this is how he recommends that the leadership organize their strategy. Okay, and that's great. And I talk about this as well. And leadership should be taking this in consideration. But while they're doing this, I have people that they want to actually start securing things. While these conversations with leadership are going on, you have operators, you have process engineers, you have IT people that are devoted to the OT environment that are like, okay, all right, in the meantime, while they're doing this for a week or 2 weeks, what should I be doing to secure my network? Okay. So while that leadership and that management is doing that strategic planning, okay, what tactical decisions should I be making, and then what should I be implementing from an operation standpoint? And I just use this pyramid to kind of organize my thoughts about the flow of information. Our leadership is going to be making decisions. They're going to be making policies, and eventually that's going to move down to our tactical decisions. Our management is going to be, coming up with our standards and guidelines, and eventually we'll be coming up with procedures, and then somebody's going to implement those things. All right, and it takes a long time to filter down this pyramid from strategic through the tactical into the operations. Well, we've got people that are already down there. They want to do it. They want to change this worst case scenario that you see on the right hand side. They want to change that and improve it while people are making decisions. In other words, they don't want, if they don't want attackers coming in and taking over their process and bringing their process down, while people are trying to, decide, what's the best way to do this. Okay. All right. So here is what I give as recommendations for tactical security. Okay. If you're going to implement things right now, you need to take into consideration these, and I've prioritized these associated with what I think will help reduce the risk quickly. Okay, there's a caveat to this. Okay, it's you still need to plan how you're going to do this throughout your organization. All of these things need to be organized. Okay, so I'm not saying not to plan these things out. What I'm saying is that if you're going to, while you're doing your planning, some people within your organization can be doing a few things, a few efforts to help reduce the security. And the most effective things are going to be taking a look at this. And we're going to drill into these 5 things. Okay, but I need to caveat that whole thing is that yes, you need to have a plan. You need to have direction. Your security program, your information from your leadership, direction from your leadership is going to be hugely important going forward. This is the 0 to 2 weeks, 0 to 2 months while they're working on that. These are things that they can be doing to gather information to feed into that leadership so that they can define, so they have an understanding of what they need to be making decisions about, so they can evaluate their maturity on protecting things. You're going to be gathering information in all of these areas and feeding that up into them, but also hopefully you can make some quick changes, some minor changes to reduce your risk within these environments. So the first thing is network segmentation. We want to isolate our control network as much as possible from our enterprise network. Now, this takes a lot of planning, All right, we have to, we can't just throw in a firewall and turn on deny everything. We can't do that because we don't know what our processes are requiring from the enterprise network, from the business environment, and from the, how do your engineers connect into this, all right? If we just throw up a firewall and start denying everything, we're going to break something within our control network. So we do need to gather some information, but the ultimate goal is we need to do some segmentation and isolation around our, from our enterprise network to our control network. We need to put ACLs in place if we can. I mean, we don't even need to buy a firewall. We can set up ACLs on some of our network controls and only allow specific systems to talk to systems from the control, enterprise network into our control network. Those SAP servers that are right now configured to communicate with the data historian. We can't just cut those off for business purposes. It could have a negative impact on the process. So, but at least we can limit that flow so the historian is only talking to SAP servers. Our workstations and laptops that are associated with our engineers and our operators, if they're in our enterprise network, if we cut this off, they might not be able to do their job because of the network flow. But at least we can identify where they're at and hopefully to only permit them. You don't need your help desk communicating down into your control network. You don't need your HR systems and other systems communicating down. So identifying quickly how you can separate these networks, putting in a firewall if you can, at least a firewall in monitor mode, logging mode, so you can see what is communicating, and then and that will help quicken the isolation of that control network from the enterprise network. Okay. Also, a lot of that information is going to feed back up into leadership. Like we mentioned, they need to know what are the business requirements, what are the current business requirements, that information flow, that information exchange between the control network and the enterprise network. Do we require some communications? Do we have to start talking to people about the different policies? So this information is going to flow up to them. So what we're starting with is we're starting with the enforcement boundaries between our Purdue levels 3 and 4. Purdue level 4 is our enterprise, our plant-wide network. Purdue level 3 is our control network, specifically where our master servers are. So those are terms that the industry understands. If you're not familiar with it, it's terms that we go over in the ICS 410 class to help people understand how process and control networks are organized and designed. Okay, so enforcement boundary between levels 3 and 4 is what we're taking into consideration, slowly progressing it up. Remember, we're not making, and I have to caveat this, we're not making dramatic changes to this. These are just quick things that can improve or reduce the risk, improve the security until we have a specific direction to go forward to. The next thing I recommend people take into consideration is access control. How are people authenticating into those control networks? How are they getting in to do their jobs? If we do our network segmentation correctly, we're going to reduce a lot of that. But if we reduce that network segmentation and still allow people to use their enterprise credentials to manage things within the control network, it's, it means that an attacker that's gained access to our enterprise networks is still going to be easily able to hop into our control network. So we need to take that into consideration. We need to separate our Active Directory environment from our enterprise network to our control network. Now, I know as soon as I said that, maybe not all of you, but some of you are like, man, it is not easy to separate Active Directory environments. It's not easy to set one up. It's not easy to migrate all of the users and global policies. That's not an easy thing to do. Well, I understand that. That's not necessarily what I'm recommending to do, but I am recommending that you determine whether or not you can separate that. Maybe you create an Active Directory server and you replicate it in there, but you don't allow authentication across that environment, across those that firewall, that new network segmentation that you've put in place. But things are still able to authenticate back to that replicated environment, and you just don't allow those communications to go across. That would be one approach. Okay, so I would take that into, I would recommend that access control be a consideration from an Active Directory standpoint. Also, you want to take into consideration what your vendors, how your vendors and integrators are accessing your environment, because a lot of times this isn't from your corporate network. A lot of times this is coming over from the internet into your control network via some type of VPN. Some integrators have direct connections into organizations. It really depends on the service level agreements, how everything was set up. All right. And so you need to evaluate that and understand how your vendors, your third parties, external people are accessing your control networks, and get a control on that. Reduce that as much as possible. Force them through VPNs, using credentials, using multi-factor authentication if it's possible. But certainly I'm talking about things that might take a lot of efforts to set up. So in this case, when we're talking about quick reducing of risk until we have specific guidance from leadership, we can at least identify where they're coming from, how they're accessing, limit what they can talk to when they're in there. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about access control, identifying the quick wins that we can do in 0 to 2 months. Okay. And I am watching the questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it up there. The next thing I wanted to talk about was logging and monitoring. So we have, the first thing that people think about when we talk about logging and monitoring is log and monitor all the things. Okay, and certainly that's what we want to get to. We want to know what's going on with these PLCs, program logic controllers. If our endpoints, if our sensors and our actuators are producing information, we want to log that. Okay, but logging takes a lot of consideration. Pulling logs from different subnets throughout our control network, getting that to log forwarders, forwarding that back to some type of central log storage server, tying that into a SOC, into a SIM. Those are things that need to come down from leadership. Direction, what's our approach, where is it going to go, who's going to monitor it. We do need to identify those things, but we need to wait for guidance. We need to wait for buy-in and so forth. Okay, so in those first 0 to 2 months, how can we improve security, improve our vision into this network? And so my recommendation would be to start with increasing the master server local log files. Every organization that I've gone into that doesn't have a security program specifically outlining this, when you go and look at their master servers, their log files are the default size. They're extremely small. And so that contains a little bit of information, but for a lot of systems, that's less than a day's worth of information. It just rotates it. Windows logs eat their own tail. We don't have they don't maintain separate log files, as they're going through like you would on a Unix system, a Unix-based system. Okay, and those files are extremely small. You need to look at those and bump it up. Of course, you have to be careful not to create those log files too big so that it brings down the operating system. But you're going to get a lot of value by increasing the log size on those systems. If you do have an event, now you can at least research it. You can have somebody go out there and manually pull those log files, get them to a central location, and start doing analysis on it. Without that data, without that information is just lost. And you don't know what decisions to make when there is an event going on. You don't have that actionable intelligence to help direct your team, to help direct your approach. Okay. I would say that, and I do have centralized on there. If you can get something centralized, if you can start pushing something to a centralized server, and typically these are going to be Windows-based servers. So if you can get things configured and quickly stand up a centralized Windows log event server, go ahead and do that. As long as it's not saturating the network, as long as you're testing these things. But it is much better to have your logs centralized than to have to manually go out to each and every server and pull logs when you need to answer questions. Okay, So if that might be a quick win that you're able to do. Certainly you'd have to talk to your teams. Definitely have to consider any type of network saturation. If you can increase logging for some of your master servers, Unix-based master servers, you want to do that as well. But typically in this first couple months time period that we're talking about, you're not going to really go down into your PLCs, your endpoints, your field devices. You don't want to consider that. Wait for your leadership to give specific direction associated with that before you start looking at those lower levels. Concentrate on your master servers. Okay. Next is asset inventory. All right. When I created this list, and I've presented this list at at different times and different presentations, and I like to have the leadership within that ICS SANS ICS team. I do peer reviews and leadership reviews for a lot of my efforts. And when I came up with this list, these 5 things that I would like to prioritize tactically. Tim Conway, his first response was like, these are great, this is awesome, move asset inventory first. Okay, asset inventory is the most important thing when we're considering incident response. Understanding what you have out there. You can't respond to things if you don't know what assets you have, what hardware and software is deployed in your control network. How are you going to make decisions if you don't understand what's out there? So he wants to prioritize that, and I understand that. Asset inventory is extremely important. You saw it in Dale's recommendations. You need to get asset inventory handled. Actually, your leadership needs asset inventory information to be pushed up to them so that they can do that maturity modeling, understanding the maturity of the organization, what they need to do from a cybersecurity framework perspective so that they can prioritize their efforts. They need to have asset inventory. You need to know what's out there, what you have implemented, what are the things that you need, what you're lacking, and so forth to make their decisions. So asset inventory is extremely important. But from my mind, we're talking about things that can reduce risk quickly. So we do want to get asset inventory. We want to have that information. But I would say if we want to reduce that risk, covering those first 3 things, those first 3 bullets at the beginning, identifying segmentation, access control, and logging, that's going to reduce our risk significantly. We can be gathering asset inventory possibly at the same time, or after we knock those first 3 things out really quickly, and then start turning to asset inventory, because sometimes this can be a lot more difficult. All right, I say start here. My start with, it says passive information gathering. Absolutely, you want to do passive information gathering. Some people actually, when you talk to most OT personnel, they don't want to scan their networks, and they're absolutely right. You don't want to, if you're going to scan your control networks, you want to have a plan around that. You want to make sure that you're using the right tools and the right way to gather that information. You're better off with passive information gathering, using tools like NetFlow, or configuring your control environment, or your network environment to give you PCAP captures, and then you can analyze those packet captures to get an understanding of what assets are on your network and communicating. All right, so that would be passive information gathering. There are other ways that you can do asset inventory. There are solutions that are provided by different vendors and different integrators, but I can't list those because there's so many different types of solutions, so many different types of management softwares and implementations. Okay, so I would start with this first. By enabling NetFlow, you're also helping with that information gathering, generating more logs about your environment, understanding the flow of information, and as well as identifying your assets. So doing that NetFlow and/or PCAP is valuable in 2 ways. Okay. But you definitely want to do asset inventory. It is very important. It can be more difficult though. I would say that's why I'm saying go with the other three first. Identify how you're going to do that, assign those, and then at the same time be gathering that asset inventory. But you do want to know all the things within your control network, or else how can you make decisions? Then the final bullet, and this one's near and dear to my heart because I do incident response. I've been doing it for a very, very long time. Ultimately, in my mind, is why do all of this security if you're not ready to respond to somebody attacking your environment? The worst case scenario we can have in a control network is somebody that is on our control network controlling our devices, and we don't have control of them. All right. But we need to organize this as well. We need to be, we need to start understanding how our people are going to be doing incident response when we detect that there's a bad guy in there. So we need to plan these things out, right? I'm saving this for last because, I do want to have those quick wins to reduce the risk of these environments, all right? But this is one of the most important things that you need to do. And from my start with there, all right, absolutely. You want to start doing tabletop training exercises that include personnel and roles from your IT team, from your IT security team, and from your OT teams. You need to identify very specific people, sit those people down at a table, and talk through different types of scenarios that can occur on your control network. And ask them questions about, okay, who's responsible for this? Who's responsible for that? How would you, what decisions would you make? And they need to be saying how they would act and how they would respond and who they'd be calling in front of everybody. Because immediately somebody's going to say, that's not how this works. I'm not responsible for that. This person's responsible for that. And you're going through tabletop sessions and through talking through different types of scenarios, you're going to quickly identify issues associated with roles and responsibilities, communications, who do we contact, and so forth. You're going to identify those issues. You're going to identify the, potentially the fact that your IT and IT security team wants to do very specific, take specific actions, but your OT team won't allow them to do it. Or your OT team will say that will be bad because of this. And that team needs to learn that as well. So vice versa, both the OT team and the IT and IT security teams, they need to learn from each other. The only way to do that is through the communications. The only way to understand how they're going to respond to security events and incidences, compromises within the control network is to actually have them do training around that. So while this is the last thing, and you can see me, I'm harping on this very much. It's very, very important that this happens within your environment. Okay, so it is listed last because you're going to have to think about it. You're going to have to set it up. You're going to have to get those teams together, but you definitely want this to occur. Our desired result out of any security program that's associated with our a control network is to move from the worst case scenario that you see on the left-hand side of the slide to the right-hand side of the slide, which is a well-managed control network that is adhering to the Purdue model and to the 62443 associated with segmentation and implementation of security controls associated with our control network. But the right-hand side, getting to the right-hand side, that takes guidance from leadership. That takes buy-in, that takes money, that takes a lot of effort. There's going to be a lot of things going on in between. So what I've tried to outline are some of the, while they're getting this process started, while they're getting the methodology and thinking about how they're going to leadership, how your organization is going to approach getting to this mature environment, your teams want to do things, okay? And that's what I try to outline with those 5 tactical efforts. Okay, so in conclusion, management needs to provide specific strategic guidance about how to approach a security program within your control network. Your OT and your IT teams are responsible for gathering information about your OT environment and letting them know what the current state is, okay? You're responsible for that. You need to do that. But at the same time, you could be, as you're gathering that information, you can be making small changes, taking small steps to help secure the environment. In other words, you don't need to wait for 2 weeks or 2 months until they decide on a plan to start planning things out, okay? Because the bad guys aren't waiting. They're not going to wait. Okay, let's wait for them to, have a security program. The bad guys aren't doing that. So while your leadership is preparing, your teams can be taking action. They want to take action. So hopefully that my 5 tactical things, my 5 tactical recommendations can help drive them in that direction. Okay, and that's it. I really appreciate everybody's time. We do have time. It took 45 minutes. We've got 15 extra minutes. Right now I don't see any questions, but if you have any questions, please, fill it out, either in the chat or in the questions window, and I'll be happy to answer that. Other than that, my name's Don Weber. And you can check me out at cutawaysecurity.com. You can email me if you have questions and I'm just not seeing it up there. You can contact me on either LinkedIn or on Twitter. I'm fairly active in both of those. It might take me a little while to get around to it, but definitely I will respond to you. Other than that, I appreciate your time. This has been a SANS at Mike. This will actually go up onto the SANS webcast site. So if you have people, if you want to point people to the recording, if they missed it, or if you want to watch it again, please feel free to go up there. You're already signed up, so you can have access to it. I do see a question in the chat, so let me read it real quick, and then I'll attempt to answer it. So the question, what are the key controls for securing OT perimeter, specifically the border that allows integration with IT, other than traditional firewalls, IDS, IPS, etc.? Well, what I've seen implemented are exactly what you're talking about there. It's when we're talking about control networks, we're certainly not talking about critical infrastructure because those will typically already be in place. Most organizations are going to be putting your next generation firewalls in there that have some type of the normal firewall capabilities, but also some application level monitoring, intrusion detection, and so forth. A lot of those firewalls are now providing some capabilities associated with industrial protocols, but you don't want those industrial protocols flowing across your control network from your control network to your enterprise network. There are other technologies out there that will help with one-way communications, data diodes, and gateways, but certainly those are more advanced techniques. They're getting a lot cheaper nowadays, but you're typically only going to find those within critical infrastructure. To reduce the attack surface, all of these things that we're talking about are going to reduce the attack surface. You need to be setting up some type of DMZ, and that would be my recommendation for that control network. You still need a flow. You will need some flow of information between the control network and the corporate network because of business purposes, but you should have a demilitarized zone. Some organizations call it level 3.5 because it's between 3 and 4, but other organizations just call it the DMZ or the control DMZ. And you'll have other technologies that are deployed in there, read-only historians, where the information is passing. It's not passing directly out or coming directly in. It actually stops within the DMZ and somebody comes push and picks it up. So hopefully that answers your question. I am, excuse me, I am monitoring to see if there are any questions. There is, once again, there's the link in the chat for the evals. If you click on that, you'll go to the evals, and SANS definitely likes people to fill that out, so recommend you do it. Next, another question, OT cybersecurity incidents always begin in the IT environments. So that's a question. The SANS, so when we're teaching about incident response and security events within our control networks, we teach a two-stage attack process. Typically, that is starting in the corporate environment, in your enterprise environment. Attackers will come in leveraging phishing techniques and other techniques to compromise systems within your corporate environment, and then they will use that access to start gathering information about your control networks, gathering credentials, and then eventually pivoting into your control network. So that is typically the process that happens. I actually outlined this. I have a white paper that was just put up on the in the SANS reading room, and I will be giving a webcast on Friday that talks about that. And so you can go check out the reading room, and I talk about incident response in the OT environments, which will kind of help outline some of your questions on about where the attacks are being implemented within the environments. So hopefully that answers your question. And thank you very much. Yes, Semper Fi to you as well. I appreciate it. Yeah, sounds pretty scary how open some systems are. It can be, you know, it really depends on the organization, the maturity of the organization, and so forth. But that's why people are asking these questions. That's why we're, you know, responding to, you know, what should be your approach for your security program with in these environments. You know, people are taking notice. The attackers are taking notice, which is forcing other people to take notice. So some people are doing it better than others. You know, hopefully it's, you know, we're here to help. That's what I'm trying to do, is help people define their approach. So I appreciate your input. I appreciate everybody's questions and your input. That really helps. And like I said, if you have any additional questions, if I didn't get to you, please, you know, reach out to and contact me.